The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Eldoria Palace, where Captain Marcus Blackwood stood at attention, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. At 42, Marcus had served the royal family for over 2 decades, earning his position as head of the royal guard through unwavering loyalty and exceptional skill. His steel-gray eyes surveyed the grounds with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen too much political intrigue and family drama unfold within these ancient walls. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the marble corridors as Queen Isabella emerged from the morning council meeting, her expression troubled. Beside her walked her second husband, Lord Chancellor Edmund Ashford, a man who had married into royalty 5 years prior after the tragic death of the beloved King Frederick. Edmund brought with him his own son from his previous marriage, Adrian Ashford, now 26 and bearing the courtesy title of Lord Adrian. Marcus had watched Adrian grow from a hesitant newcomer to someone increasingly comfortable with his position in the royal household. Perhaps too comfortable. The young man had initially shown respect for the established protocols, and the young Prince George, Queen Isabella's 15-year-old son from her first marriage and the rightful heir to the throne. However, as months turned into years, Adrian's behavior had begun to shift in ways that concerned the seasoned captain. Prince George, despite his youth, carried himself with the dignity expected of a future king. He was intelligent, compassionate, and genuinely cared for the people of Eldoria. The prince had inherited his late father's sense of justice and his mother's diplomatic nature. Marcus had personally overseen much of George's security training and had grown to respect the young man's character. George treated everyone with respect, from the highest nobles to the kitchen staff, never allowing his royal status to inflate his ego. In stark contrast, Adrian had gradually developed what Marcus could only describe as an inflated sense of entitlement. It started small, cutting in line during formal ceremonies, speaking over others during family discussions, and making subtle remarks about his position in the family. Marcus had initially attributed this to the natural adjustment period of joining a royal household, but the behavior had not only persisted but escalated. The breaking point had been building for months. Adrian had begun to openly challenge Prince George's authority during family meetings, suggesting that his experience as an older brother should carry more weight in decisions affecting the kingdom. He had started to insert himself into conversations about succession planning, despite having no legal claim to the throne. Most troubling of all, he had begun to cultivate relationships with certain nobles who were known for their ambiguous loyalty to the crown. Marcus remembered the previous week's incident vividly. During a formal dinner with visiting dignitaries from the neighboring kingdom of Valeria, Adrian had deliberately contradicted Prince George's well-researched comments about trade agreements. The young prince had handled the situation with remarkable grace, but Marcus had seen the flash of humiliation in George's eyes. It was a calculated move on Adrian's part, designed to undermine the prince's credibility in front of important guests. The captain had served under 3 generations of Eldorian royalty, and he understood the delicate balance required to maintain both family harmony and political stability. He had watched kingdoms fall due to internal strife and succession disputes. The thought of such chaos befalling Eldoria under his watch was unacceptable. That morning, as Marcus completed his routine security briefing with the Queen, he noticed the strain in her expression. Queen Isabella was a woman of remarkable strength who had guided the kingdom through the difficult period following her husband's death. She had made the challenging decision to remarry, knowing that Eldoria needed stability and that she needed a trusted advisor by her side. Lord Edmund had proven to be a capable chancellor, but his son's behavior was becoming an increasing source of tension. "Captain Blackwood," the Queen said quietly as they concluded their meeting, "I need to speak with you privately about a delicate matter." Marcus dismissed the other guards and waited as Queen Isabella gathered her thoughts. Her usually composed demeanor showed cracks of genuine concern. "I'm sure you've noticed the changes in Adrian's behavior over recent months," she began, her voice carefully controlled. "What started as typical adjustment issues have evolved into something more problematic. His challenges to George's position are becoming more frequent and more public." And, Marcus nodded respectfully. "Your Majesty, I have indeed observed concerning patterns. The young lord seems to have developed aspirations that extend beyond his role in the family." The Queen sighed deeply. "Edmund loves his son, and I understand that. But Adrian's actions are beginning to affect George's confidence and, more importantly, the stability of our succession. The nobles are starting to take sides, and that's dangerous for the kingdom. Marcus had noticed the same political undercurrents. Certain ambitious nobles had begun to hover around Adrian, seeing an opportunity to gain influence through someone they perceived as more malleable than the principled Prince George. These were dangerous games that could lead to the kind of factional disputes that had torn apart other kingdoms. "What would you have me do, Your Majesty?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I need you to watch Adrian more closely. Document his activities, his meetings, his conversations. I fear that what appears to be sibling rivalry may actually be something more calculated. If Adrian is actively working to undermine George's position, or if he's being influenced by those who would benefit from instability, I need to know." Marcus understood the gravity of what was being asked. He was being tasked with essentially spying on a member of the royal household, something that went against his natural instincts but might be necessary to protect the true heir and the kingdom's stability. "I'll increase security protocols around Prince George as well," Marcus added. "If there are those who see Adrian as a pathway to power, they might consider more direct methods of altering the succession." The Queen's face paled slightly at the implication, but she nodded. "Do whatever is necessary to protect my son and the rightful succession. The people of Eldoria deserve stability, not the chaos that comes from disputed claims to the throne." As their meeting concluded, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, but sometimes protecting them meant protecting them from each other. The complex dynamics of blended families were challenging enough in ordinary circumstances, but when combined with the pressures of royal succession and political intrigue, they could become explosive. That afternoon, Marcus implemented new security measures with characteristic efficiency. He assigned his most trusted guards to maintain discreet surveillance of Adrian's activities while ensuring Prince George's safety remained the top priority. He also began reviewing the backgrounds of nobles who had been spending increased time around Adrian, looking for patterns that might indicate organized opposition to Prince George's eventual ascension. The captain knew that the coming days would test not only his professional skills, but also his ability to navigate the treacherous waters of royal politics. He had served the crown faithfully for over 20 years, but he had never faced a situation quite like this one. The challenge wasn't foreign enemies or external threats. It was the slow poison of internal discord that could destroy the kingdom from within. As evening approached and the palace settled into its nightly routine, Marcus stood once again in the courtyard, watching the lights flicker in the windows above. Somewhere in those rooms, a young prince was struggling with the burden of his destiny, while his stepbrother plotted ways to share or steal that burden. The queen was likely lying awake, torn between her love for her husband and her duty to her son and kingdom. Marcus had seen enough political intrigue to know that situations like this rarely resolved themselves peacefully. Someone would have to take action to protect the legitimate succession and the stability of Eldoria. As the head of the royal guard, that responsibility fell to him. He only hoped that when the time came for decisive action, he would have the wisdom to know exactly what form that action should take. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the bonds of family, the strength of tradition, and the resolve of a loyal captain who had sworn to protect the crown at any cost. 3 days after his private conversation with Queen Isabella, Captain Marcus Blackwood received the evidence he had been dreading. His most trusted lieutenant, Sergeant Helena Cross, approached him in the early morning hours with a detailed report that would change everything. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," Helena whispered as they met in Marcus's private office, a small chamber adjacent to the main guard quarters. She placed a leather portfolio on his desk with trembling hands. Marcus opened the portfolio to find transcribed conversations, detailed meeting logs, and even sketched diagrams of secretive gatherings. Helena had proven herself once again to be an exceptional intelligence officer, capable of blending into the background while capturing crucial information. "Lord Adrian held 3 separate meetings yesterday," Helena began, her voice tight with concern. "The first was with Duke Rothwell, the second with Marquess Blackthorne, and the third with a group that included both of them, plus Earl Grimsby and Baron Ashworth. Sir, these aren't casual social calls." Marcus studied the transcriptions carefully. Duke Rothwell had always been ambitious, but he had previously shown loyalty to the crown. Marquess Blackthorne was known for his opportunistic nature, always positioning himself to benefit from political changes. The inclusion of Earl Grimsby was particularly troubling, as he controlled significant military resources in the northern provinces. What were they discussing? Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would confirm his worst fears. Helena pointed to specific passages in the transcripts. They're talking about stability concerns regarding Prince George's youth and inexperience. Lord Adrian is positioning himself as a more mature alternative, someone who could provide immediate leadership while George develops his capabilities. They're using careful language, but the implication is clear. Marcus read through the conversations, noting the sophisticated political maneuvering. Adrian wasn't openly claiming the throne, but he was systematically undermining confidence in George's readiness to rule while presenting himself as a temporary solution. It was a clever strategy that allowed the conspirators to frame their actions as patriotic concern for the kingdom rather than treasonous ambition. "There's more, sir," Helena continued. "They've been in contact with certain military commanders in the outer provinces. Nothing overtly treasonous, but they're testing loyalties, asking hypothetical questions about supporting alternative leadership arrangements during times of crisis." The captain felt his blood run cold. This wasn't just palace intrigue or family drama, it was the beginning of what could become a coup attempt. The fact that they were reaching out to military commanders suggested they were preparing for the possibility of armed resistance to their plans. "Any indication of foreign involvement?" Marcus asked. Neighboring kingdoms had always viewed Eldoria's rich agricultural lands and strategic position with envy. "Nothing concrete yet, sir, but Baron Ashworth mentioned friends across the eastern border who would support stabilizing measures if necessary." That could be referring to Prince Victor of Drakmore. He's always been ambitious, and his kingdom has territorial disputes with our eastern provinces. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out over the palace grounds where Prince George was currently practicing his swordsmanship with the armsmaster. The young prince moved with fluid grace, displaying the natural athleticism and dedication that had impressed his instructors. George was preparing himself to be a worthy king, unaware that others were actively working to prevent him from ever taking the throne. "We need more information," Marcus decided. "Continue the surveillance, but be extremely careful. If they suspect we know about their meetings, they might accelerate their timeline or take more drastic action. Also, I want you to discreetly contact Commander Reynolds in the northern garrison and Captain Thornfield in the eastern border patrol. Don't reveal what we know, but gauge their current loyalties and any unusual communications they may have received." Helena nodded and gathered the documents. "Sir, there's one more thing. Lord Adrian has requested a private meeting with Prince George this afternoon. He claims he wants to clear the air between them and discuss their roles in the family more openly." This news sent alarm bells ringing in Marcus's mind. Given what they now knew about Adrian's activities, any private meeting between the two young men could be dangerous. Adrian might attempt to manipulate George directly. Or worse, the meeting could be a setup for something more sinister. "Where is this meeting supposed to take place?" Marcus asked quickly. "The Royal Library, sir. Lord Adrian specifically requested privacy, saying their conversation might involve sensitive family matters that shouldn't be overheard by staff." The Royal Library was a vast chamber filled with ancient texts and valuable manuscripts. It had multiple entrances and numerous alcoves where conversations could take place away from prying eyes. For someone planning mischief, it was an ideal location. "I want the library secured, but not obviously so," Marcus ordered. "Position guards at all entrances, but keep them out of sight. I'll personally oversee the security arrangements. If anything goes wrong during that meeting, I want to be able to respond immediately." As Helena left to implement his orders, Marcus began planning his response to this escalating situation. He needed to protect Prince George while gathering enough evidence to expose Adrian's conspiracy. Most importantly, he had to do this without precipitating the very crisis they were trying to prevent. The captain spent the morning reviewing security protocols and positioning his most trusted guards throughout the palace. He also sent a discreet message to Queen Isabella, requesting an urgent meeting after the library encounter between the two young men. She needed to know what they had discovered, but timing was crucial. At precisely 2 o'clock that afternoon, Prince George made his way to the Royal Library, his expression showing a mixture of hope and wariness. Despite Adrian's increasingly hostile behavior, George still hoped to maintain family harmony. The prince's natural optimism and desire to see the best in people were among his greatest strengths as a future ruler, but they also made him vulnerable to manipulation. Marcus positioned himself in a concealed alcove with a clear view of the main reading area where the meeting would take place. He had stationed additional guards at strategic points throughout the library, all of them connected by discreet hand signals. His heart rate increased as Adrian entered the library a few minutes later, his expression uncharacteristically serious. The conversation began cordially enough, with both young men exchanging pleasantries about family matters and recent palace events. However, the tone quickly shifted as Adrian began steering the discussion toward more substantive topics. "George, I've been thinking a lot about our family situation and the responsibilities we both carry," Adrian began, his voice carrying a tone of false sincerity that made Marcus's jaw clench. "I know there have been tensions between us, and I want to address them honestly." Prince George nodded eagerly, clearly hoping this represented a genuine effort at reconciliation. "I appreciate that, Adrian. I've always hoped we could work together as brothers, despite the complexity of our situation." "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss," Adrian continued, moving closer to where George sat. "The thing is, I've been talking with various nobles and advisors, and there are growing concerns about the transition of power when the time comes." Marcus saw George's expression change subtly, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. "What kind of concerns?" Adrian leaned forward, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. "Well, you're still quite young, George. Some people worry about whether you're ready for the immense responsibilities of ruling. They think it might be wise to have a more experienced hand guiding the kingdom during the transition period." The manipulation was skillful but transparent to Marcus's experienced eye. Adrian was planting seeds of doubt about George's capabilities while positioning himself as the solution to problems that existed primarily in his own ambition. "I see," George replied slowly, his natural intelligence allowing him to recognize the underlying implications. "And I suppose you've given thought to who might provide this experienced guidance?" "Actually, I have," Adrian said, dropping any pretense of subtlety. "I'm older, I've had more exposure to political matters through my father's work, and I have strong relationships with key nobles. I could serve as a regent or co-ruler until you feel more confident in your abilities." The audacity of the proposal left Marcus momentarily stunned. Adrian was essentially asking Prince George to voluntarily step aside and allow him to take control of the kingdom. It was a breathtaking display of manipulative ambition wrapped in the guise of brotherly concern. Prince George was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see the young man's mind working through the implications of what he had just heard. When George finally spoke, his voice carried a new note of steel that reminded Marcus powerfully of the late King Frederick. "Adrian, I appreciate your concern, but I think you may have misunderstood something fundamental about our situation. I am the rightful heir to the throne of Eldoria, not because of my age or experience, but because of my birthright and the legal succession. That's not something that can be changed by the opinions of nobles, or the convenience of political arrangements." Adrian's mask of brotherly concern began to slip, revealing the calculating ambition beneath. "George, you're being naive. Politics is about more than birthright. It's about practical reality. If the nobles don't have confidence in your leadership, your reign will be unstable from the very beginning. Then perhaps," George said with quiet dignity, "I should focus on earning that confidence through my actions and character, rather than stepping aside for someone whose claim to authority rests entirely on political maneuvering." The tension in the room was palpable as the two young men stared at each other across a gulf that had suddenly become unbridgeable. Marcus realized that this conversation represented the point of no return in the relationship between George and Adrian. Whatever happened next would determine not just their personal dynamic, but potentially the future of the kingdom. Adrian's expression hardened as he realized his manipulation had failed. "You're making a mistake, George. The people who matter in this kingdom are starting to have serious doubts about your suitability. If you refuse to consider reasonable arrangements now, you might find yourself facing much more difficult choices later." The threat was barely veiled, and Marcus tensed, ready to intervene if the confrontation escalated further. Prince George, however, remained remarkably composed as he stood to end the meeting. "Adrian, I think this conversation has revealed everything we needed to know about each other's positions. I hope you'll consider carefully what path you choose to pursue from here, because the consequences will affect far more than just our family relationship. As Prince George left the library with quiet dignity intact, Marcus remained hidden, watching Adrian's reaction. The young man's face cycled through anger, frustration, and finally cold calculation. Whatever restraint had previously governed his actions appeared to have evaporated during that confrontation. Marcus knew that the situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Adrian had revealed his hand and been rejected, which meant he would likely move from subtle manipulation to more aggressive tactics. The captain needed to warn Queen Isabella immediately and prepare for whatever desperate measures Adrian and his conspirators might attempt next. The emergency meeting in Queen Isabella's private chambers took place under the cover of darkness, 3 hours after the confrontation in the Royal Library. Captain Marcus Blackwood sat across from the Queen with Sergeant Helena Cross positioned discreetly by the door to ensure their privacy. The weight of the evidence spread across the Queen's desk painted a stark picture of the crisis they now faced. Queen Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she read through the transcribed conversations and intelligence reports. Her face, usually composed and regal, showed the strain of a mother and ruler caught between impossible choices. The revelation that her stepson was actively conspiring against her biological son struck at the very heart of her carefully constructed family unity. "How long has this been going on?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Based on our investigation, the serious planning began approximately 6 weeks ago," Marcus replied. "However, Lord Adrian's behavior patterns suggest he's been cultivating these relationships and testing loyalties for several months." The Queen closed her eyes briefly, as if trying to shut out the painful reality. "Edmund has no idea. He sees only the son he loves, not the ambitious schemer that Adrian has become. This will destroy him." Marcus understood the personal agony this represented for Queen Isabella. Lord Chancellor Edmund had been not just a political alliance, but a genuine love match that had helped heal her heart after King Frederick's death. The revelation of Adrian's treachery would shatter that happiness and potentially destroy her marriage. "Your Majesty," Helena spoke up respectfully, "there's been a new development since the library meeting. Our surveillance indicates that Lord Adrian sent urgent messages to all his co-conspirators immediately afterward. They're planning an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning." The Queen looked up sharply. "Where?" "The old watchtower on the eastern grounds," Marcus answered. "It's isolated enough for privacy, but close enough to the palace for quick access. The choice of location suggests they're moving from planning to action." Queen Isabella stood and walked to the window, gazing out over the moonlit gardens where she had once walked with her late husband, dreaming of the kingdom their son would one day inherit. The irony of fighting to preserve that inheritance against threats from within her own household was not lost on her. "What are our options?" she asked, turning back to face Marcus. "We have 3 possible courses of action," Marcus replied, having spent the afternoon analyzing their strategic position. "First, we could confront Lord Adrian directly with the evidence and demand he cease his activities. However, this would likely drive the conspiracy deeper underground and give them time to perfect their plans. Second option, we could arrest Adrian and his co-conspirators immediately on charges of treason. The evidence we have would likely support such action, but it would create a massive political crisis and potentially destabilize the kingdom during the investigation and trials." Queen Isabella nodded grimly. "And the third option?" Marcus met her eyes steadily. "We allow them to proceed with their meeting tomorrow, but we gather additional evidence of their treasonous intent. Once we have irrefutable proof of their plans, we move decisively to neutralize the threat while minimizing political damage. That's the most dangerous option," Helena observed. "If we wait too long, they might act first." "Yes," Marcus agreed, "but it's also the option most likely to preserve the kingdom's stability. If we can expose their conspiracy completely, including any foreign connections, we can eliminate not just the immediate threat, but the entire network." The Queen was quiet for several minutes, weighing the terrible choices before her. Finally, she spoke with the authority of a ruler who had learned to make difficult decisions. "We proceed with option 3, but with additional safeguards. I want Prince George's security doubled immediately, and I want our most loyal military commanders secretly briefed on the situation so they can't be caught off guard. I'll handle the military briefings personally, Marcus confirmed. Commander Reynolds in the north and Captain Thornfield on the eastern border are completely trustworthy. We'll also need to secure the succession documents and ensure the royal seal remains protected. As they discussed the practical details of their counter-operation, a soft knock at the chamber door interrupted them. Helena moved quickly to answer it, speaking in low tones with whoever waited outside. When she returned, her expression was troubled. Your Majesty, Lord Chancellor Edmund is requesting an urgent meeting with you. He seems quite distressed. Queen Isabella and Marcus exchanged meaningful glances. Had Edmund discovered his son's activities, or was this related to something else entirely? Send him in, the Queen decided. Captain Blackwood, remain but stay in the background. We need to determine what he knows. Lord Chancellor Edmund entered the chamber with obvious agitation, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled and his eyes showing signs of sleeplessness. He stopped short when he noticed Marcus's presence, but continued forward at the Queen's gesture. Isabella, I need to speak with you about Adrian, he began without preamble. Something has changed in him recently, and I'm deeply concerned. The Queen maintained her composure while her heart raced. What kind of concerns, Edmund? He's been secretive, having meetings at odd hours, and his attitude toward George has become increasingly hostile. Tonight, when I tried to speak with him about family harmony, he became defensive and made some very disturbing statements about George's fitness to rule. Marcus remained silent, but he was impressed by Edmund's perceptiveness. The Lord Chancellor's love for his son hadn't blinded him to the reality of Adrian's changing character. What exactly did he say? Queen Isabella asked gently. Edmund ran his hands through his graying hair, a gesture of frustrated despair. He claimed that George is too idealistic and inexperienced to handle the complexities of modern kingship. He suggested that the kingdom would benefit from more practical leadership during the transition period. When I pointed out that George is the rightful heir, Adrian laughed and said that succession laws were created by men and could be changed by men. The room fell silent as the implications of Adrian's words sank in. He had essentially revealed his treasonous intentions to his own father, either out of arrogance or desperation. Edmund, Queen Isabella said carefully, I need to share something with you, but you must understand that what I'm about to tell you is a matter of kingdom security. Over the next 30 minutes, Queen Isabella and Marcus briefed Lord Chancellor Edmund on the extent of his son's conspiracy. They showed him the evidence, explained the scope of the threat, and outlined their planned response. Edmund's face went through a series of transformations: disbelief, horror, grief, and finally, grim acceptance. My son is committing treason, he whispered, the words seeming to tear something vital from his chest. The boy I raised, the child I loved and supported through everything, is trying to steal the throne from his stepbrother. Edmund, I'm so sorry, Queen Isabella said, reaching out to take his hand. I know how much this hurts. What hurts most, Edmund replied with painful honesty, is that part of me isn't entirely surprised. Adrian has always been ambitious, always felt that he deserved more than life gave him. I thought marriage into the royal family would satisfy that ambition, but instead it seems to have inflamed it. Marcus spoke up respectfully. Lord Chancellor, your cooperation in our counter-operation could be crucial. We need someone close to Adrian who can monitor his activities and potentially influence his decisions. Edmund straightened, and for a moment the grieving father was replaced by the experienced politician who had helped guide the kingdom through difficult times. What do you need me to do? Continue acting normally around Adrian, but pay attention to everything he says and does. If he tries to involve you in his plans or asks for your support, don't refuse immediately. That might make him suspicious. Instead, ask for time to consider his proposals while gathering information about his timeline and specific intentions. And if he asks me to take action against George or the Queen, Edmund asked quietly, then you inform us immediately and we move to arrest him and his co-conspirators, Marcus replied firmly. At that point, the immediate threat to Prince George would outweigh any strategic advantages of continued surveillance. As their meeting concluded, Queen Isabella faced the painful reality that her attempt to create a stable, united royal family had instead produced a nest of conspiracy and betrayal. The man she loved was suffering because of his son's treachery, and her own son's life was potentially in danger from someone who should have been his protector and ally. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Marcus said as Edmund prepared to leave. "Tomorrow's meeting in the Watchtower will likely determine their final plans. Depending on what we learn, we may need to act immediately afterward. Your Majesty, you should be prepared for the possibility that by tomorrow evening, Lord Adrian will be under arrest for high treason." The weight of that statement hung in the air like a death sentence. Queen Isabella was about to lose her stepson, Edmund was about to lose his child, and the kingdom was about to endure a crisis that would test the very foundations of its stability. "Then we'd better make sure we're ready," Queen Isabella said with the quiet strength that had carried her through previous crises. "Captain Blackwood, implement all security measures immediately. Lord Chancellor, return to your duties but maintain normal appearances. Tomorrow, we discover exactly how far this conspiracy extends and what we must do to stop it." As the meeting dispersed, Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring either the peaceful resolution of a dangerous threat or the beginning of a conflict that could tear the kingdom apart. Either way, the royal guard would be ready to take control of the situation and protect the rightful succession, no matter the cost. Dawn broke gray and overcast as Captain Marcus Blackwood positioned his elite surveillance team around the old watchtower on the eastern grounds of the palace complex. The ancient stone structure, built during the kingdom's early defensive period, had fallen into disuse as a military installation, but maintained its commanding view of the surrounding landscape. For conspirators seeking privacy, it was an ideal location, isolated enough to avoid casual observation, but accessible enough for urgent meetings. Marcus crouched behind a cluster of overgrown hedges, his eyes fixed on the tower's entrance, while his ears remained tuned to the barely audible whispers coming through his communication device. Sergeant Helena Cross and two of his most trusted guards had managed to position themselves inside the tower's lower level, hidden in alcoves that had once housed defensive equipment. The risk was enormous. If discovered, their presence would alert the conspirators and potentially trigger immediate action against Prince George. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, Duke Rothwell arrived first, his expensive carriage stopping a discreet distance from the tower. The Duke's normally jovial expression was replaced by one of serious intent as he made his way to the entrance. Within minutes, Marquess Blackthorne appeared on horseback, followed by Earl Grimsby in a plain traveling coach designed to avoid attention. "All primary targets are converging," Marcus whispered into his communication device. "Maintain positions and document everything." The final arrival was Lord Adrian himself, who approached the tower on foot from the direction of the palace. His choice to walk rather than ride suggested he was being careful to avoid drawing attention to his involvement in whatever was about to unfold. Inside the tower, Helena's voice came through Marcus's earpiece in barely audible whispers as the conspirators gathered in the main chamber above her hiding place. "They're all here now, sir. Lord Adrian is speaking first." Marcus strained to make out the conversation through Helena's relay, knowing that what they learned in the next hour would determine the fate of the kingdom. "Gentlemen," Adrian's voice carried clearly in the stone chamber. "Yesterday's conversation with Prince George confirmed what we already suspected. He's not going to step aside voluntarily, and he's too naive to understand the political realities of his situation." Duke Rothwell's response was cautious but supportive. "That's unfortunate, but not entirely unexpected. Young men rarely appreciate the wisdom of their elders, especially when it conflicts with their sense of entitlement. The question now," Marquess Blackthorne interjected, "is whether we proceed with more direct measures or attempt to find alternative approaches to our shared concerns about the kingdom's future." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. They were approaching the crucial moment when the conspiracy would either reveal its full extent or maintain plausible deniability. "I've been in contact with Prince Victor of Drakmore," Earl Grimsby said, his voice carrying the weight of significant revelation. "He's expressed willingness to provide military support for a stabilization effort, in exchange for favorable border arrangements and trade concessions." The involvement of a foreign prince in their conspiracy elevated the matter from domestic political maneuvering to international intrigue with potentially devastating consequences for Eldoria's sovereignty. "That's a dangerous game," Duke Rothwell observed. "Inviting foreign military intervention could easily spiral beyond our control." "Not if we act decisively," Adrian replied, his voice gaining confidence and authority. "Here's what I propose. We create a crisis that demonstrates George's inability to handle serious threats to the kingdom. During that crisis, I step forward as a stable alternative, backed by key nobles and supported by strategic foreign allies. Once I'm established as regent, we can gradually transition to a more permanent arrangement." Marcus felt his blood chill as the full scope of Adrian's ambition became clear. This wasn't just about displacing Prince George, it was about fundamentally altering the kingdom's political structure with foreign assistance. "What kind of crisis are you envisioning?" Marquess Blackthorne asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "A threat against Prince George's safety that overwhelms the current security arrangements," Adrian explained with chilling calculation. "Nothing that would actually harm him. Of course, we're not murderers. But something serious enough to shake confidence in the Royal Guard's ability to protect the royal family and demonstrate the need for new leadership." Helena's whispered relay continued as the conspirators discussed specific details of their planned false flag operation. They intended to stage an attack on Prince George that would appear to come from disgruntled citizens or foreign agents, but which would actually be orchestrated by their own people. In the aftermath of this manufactured crisis, they would present Adrian as the only person capable of restoring order and security. "The timing is crucial," Earl Grimsby added. "We need this to happen during a public event where George's vulnerability will be obvious to everyone. The upcoming Festival of the Harvest would be ideal. Large crowds, multiple security challenges, and maximum visibility for our intervention." Marcus realized with growing horror that they were planning to attack Prince George during the kingdom's most beloved annual celebration, an event that brought together people from across Eldoria to celebrate their shared prosperity and culture. The symbolic violation of such an occasion would scar the kingdom's collective memory for generations. "I've already made arrangements with certain individuals who specialize in creating convincing threats," Adrian continued. "They understand that their role is to generate fear and confusion, not to cause actual harm. Once the attack begins, I'll arrive with a force of loyal guards to rescue George and restore order. The contrast between his helplessness and my decisive action will be impossible to ignore." "And if Prince George proves more resilient than expected?" Duke Rothwell asked. "What if he handles the crisis well and actually enhances his reputation rather than damaging it?" Adrian's response revealed the full depth of his ruthlessness. "Then we escalate. If the first incident doesn't achieve our objectives, we create additional crises until the cumulative effect destroys confidence in his leadership. Sooner or later, the pressure will break him." Marcus had heard enough. The conspiracy had evolved from political maneuvering to planned attacks against the rightful heir to the throne. The involvement of foreign military support elevated the threat to the level of invasion and conquest. Every moment they allowed this plan to develop further increased the danger to Prince George and the kingdom. "All units, prepare for immediate action," Marcus whispered into his communication device. "We're moving to arrest the conspirators now." However, as Marcus began to signal his forces, Helena's urgent whisper stopped him cold. "Sir, wait! Lord Adrian is saying something about tonight. The preliminary phase begins tonight," Adrian announced to his co-conspirators. "I've arranged for a small demonstration of our capabilities. Nothing dramatic, just enough to test our systems and plant seeds of doubt about current security arrangements. Consider it a rehearsal for the main event." Marcus realized that whatever they had planned for the Harvest Festival was still weeks away, but they intended to begin their campaign of destabilization immediately. Prince George could be in danger within hours. "What's the nature of tonight's demonstration?" Marquess Blackthorne asked. "A minor incident during George's evening ride through the Eastern Gardens," Adrian explained. "He maintains a regular schedule that makes him predictable and vulnerable. Our people will stage a brief confrontation, masked figures appearing suddenly, perhaps firing a few arrows into the ground near his horse, then disappearing before the guards can respond effectively. Nothing dangerous, but enough to make him look helpless and the royal guard appear incompetent. The casual way Adrian discussed orchestrating an attack on his stepbrother, even a supposedly harmless one, revealed the complete corruption of his character. Marcus knew that such operations rarely went according to plan, and what Adrian dismissed as a harmless demonstration could easily result in serious injury or death. "Gentlemen, I believe we have our path forward," Duke Rothwell concluded. "Tonight's demonstration will test our capabilities and begin the process of undermining confidence in the current regime. The Harvest Festival attack will complete our objectives and establish the new order we envision for Eldoria." As the conspirators began to discuss final details and coordination, Marcus made his decision. The immediate threat to Prince George's safety outweighed any potential benefits of continued surveillance. They had enough evidence to justify arrests, and waiting longer would only increase the danger to the rightful heir. "All units, implement Plan Alpha immediately," Marcus commanded through his communication device. "Surround the tower and prepare for arrests. No one leaves without our permission." Within moments, the area around the watchtower was filled with armed royal guards moving with practiced precision. Marcus approached the tower entrance with a dozen of his best soldiers, their armor gleaming in the morning sun and their weapons at the ready. "By order of Queen Isabella, sovereign ruler of Eldoria, you are all under arrest for high treason and conspiracy against the crown," Marcus announced in a voice that carried clearly through the stone structure. "Exit the tower immediately with your hands visible and surrender to royal guard custody." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of urgent whispers and shuffling feet from within the tower. Marcus knew that the conspirators were weighing their options: surrender and face trial, or resist and escalate the situation into armed conflict. "You have 30 seconds to comply," Marcus added, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "Any attempt to escape or resist will be met with appropriate force." The confrontation that had been building for weeks was finally coming to a head. In the next few minutes, Marcus would discover whether the conspirators were willing to accept defeat or whether they would choose to plunge the kingdom into the very crisis they had been planning to create. Either way, the royal guard was ready to take control and protect the rightful succession, no matter what the cost. The 30 seconds stretched like an eternity as Captain Marcus Blackwood waited for the conspirators' response. The ancient watchtower stood silent in the morning light, its weathered stones bearing witness to yet another moment that would shape the kingdom's history. Around the perimeter, his royal guards maintained perfect discipline, their weapons ready but controlled, their eyes fixed on every possible exit. Finally, the heavy wooden door of the tower creaked open. Duke Rothwell emerged first, his hands raised and his face bearing the resigned expression of a man who understood that his gamble had failed. The Duke's ornate clothing and dignified bearing seemed incongruous with his position as a captured traitor. But Marcus had seen enough political upheavals to know that ambition could corrupt even the most respectable appearances. Marquess Blackthorne followed, his cunning eyes already calculating possible escape routes or legal defenses. Earl Grimsby came next, his military bearing evident even in surrender, though his involvement with foreign powers had marked him as the most dangerous of the conspirators. Lord Adrian emerged last, his face a mask of controlled fury that barely concealed the rage boiling beneath. Unlike the others, who seemed to accept their capture with varying degrees of resignation, Adrian's posture suggested a man who still believed he could find a way to salvage his ambitions. "Lord Adrian Ashford," Marcus announced formally, "you are under arrest for high treason, conspiracy against the crown, solicitation of foreign military intervention, and planning attacks against the rightful heir to the throne of Eldoria. Duke Rothwell, Marquess Blackthorne, and Earl Grimsby, you are similarly charged with high treason and conspiracy." As his guards moved forward with chains and restraints, Marcus noticed Adrian's eyes darting toward the eastern edge of the grounds. Following his gaze, Marcus spotted movement among the distant trees, several figures on horseback who had clearly been positioned as a backup contingency. "Sergeant Cross, take a squad and apprehend those riders," Marcus commanded quickly. "Don't let anyone escape to carry word to Prince Victor or other foreign contacts." The efficiency of the Royal Guard's response demonstrated the value of Marcus's careful planning and the loyalty of his carefully selected personnel. Within minutes, the entire conspiracy network present at the scene had been neutralized, though Marcus knew that other supporters and foreign connections would need to be identified and addressed. As the prisoners were secured, Lord Chancellor Edmund appeared at the edge of the grounds, his face ashen as he witnessed his son being led away in chains. The personal tragedy playing out alongside the political crisis was evident in every line of the older man's posture. "Edmund," Marcus said quietly as he approached the Lord Chancellor, "I'm sorry it came to this." "So am I," Edmund replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I keep asking myself where I went wrong, how I failed to see what Adrian was becoming." "You didn't fail him," Marcus assured the grieving father. "Some people choose paths that lead them away from honor regardless of how they were raised. Your integrity throughout this crisis has been exemplary." As they spoke, a commotion erupted among the prisoners. Adrian had somehow managed to slip one of his restraints and was making a desperate attempt to break free from his captors. His desperation had overcome his earlier calculation, and he fought with the wild energy of someone who saw his dreams of power slipping away forever. "You don't understand," Adrian shouted as the guards subdued him. "George will destroy this kingdom with his idealism and weakness. The nobles will never truly accept him. Foreign enemies will see his softness as an opportunity for conquest." Marcus approached the struggling young man, his expression mixing professional duty with genuine sadness. "Lord Adrian, your concerns about Prince George's readiness to rule might have had merit if you had chosen to express them through legitimate channels. Instead, you chose treason and conspiracy with foreign powers. That choice has sealed your fate." "My fate?" Adrian laughed bitterly. "What about the kingdom's fate when George's naive policies lead us into disaster? What about the people who will suffer because you were too blind to see the truth?" "The truth," Marcus replied firmly, "is that Prince George has shown more wisdom and integrity in the past week than you have displayed in months of scheming. He had the opportunity to question your motives and expose your conspiracy during your library meeting, but he chose to handle the situation with discretion and dignity. That's the mark of a true leader." As the prisoners were loaded into secure transport wagons for their journey to the palace dungeons, Marcus reflected on the dramatic events that had unfolded. The conspiracy had been more extensive and dangerous than he had initially imagined, involving not just domestic political maneuvering, but foreign military intervention that could have plunged Eldoria into war. The return journey to the palace was conducted with maximum security, as Marcus knew that other supporters of the conspiracy might attempt rescue operations, or seek to eliminate the captured conspirators to prevent them from revealing additional information. However, the procession reached the palace gates without incident, where Queen Isabella and Prince George waited with appropriate solemnity for the formal transfer of the prisoners. Prince George's expression as he watched Adrian being led past him in chains was particularly striking. Rather than triumph or satisfaction, the young prince's face showed genuine sadness and disappointment. Even after learning the full extent of his stepbrother's betrayal, George seemed to mourn the relationship they might have had, and the family unity that had been shattered by ambition and treachery. "Your Majesty," Marcus reported formally to Queen Isabella, "the conspiracy against Prince George and the crown has been successfully neutralized. All primary conspirators are in custody, and we have documented evidence of their treasonous activities, including planned attacks against the rightful heir and solicitation of foreign military intervention." Queen Isabella accepted the report with the composed dignity expected of a sovereign, but Marcus could see the personal cost of the day's events in her eyes. The woman who had worked so hard to build a stable, united royal family now faced the destruction of those efforts and the painful necessity of prosecuting her stepson for treason. "Captain Blackwood," she said formally, "your service to the crown and your protection of Prince George have been exemplary. The kingdom owes you a debt of gratitude for preventing what could have been a devastating crisis." As the immediate crisis concluded, Marcus began the complex process of investigating the conspiracy's full extent. Over the following days, his interrogation of the prisoners and analysis of their communications revealed a network that extended far beyond the 4 men they had captured. Several minor nobles had provided financial support. Certain military officers had been approached about switching loyalties, and Prince Victor of Drakmore had indeed promised significant military assistance in exchange for territorial concessions. The discovery of foreign involvement required immediate diplomatic action to prevent Prince Victor from attempting military intervention to rescue his allies or achieve through force what the conspiracy had failed to accomplish through deception.